Welcome to another conversation in People in Fundraising. This podcast features interviews with nonprofit professionals who discuss their career journeys, lessons learned, and enthusiasm for working in fundraising. And here's your host, the founder of People in Fundraising, Tim Wilson.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tim Wilson, and welcome to another episode in Season 3 of the People in Fundraising Conversations series. It is Monday, February 12th, 2024, and today I'm excited and looking forward to our conversation with Matt Jennings. Good morning, Matt.
Good morning, Tim. How are you? It's good to be here.
I'm doing well. It's good to have you on the program. Just before we started recording, Matt asked me, how did I come across his name as a prospective guest? In the too long, didn't read snippet, Matt and I were at the same, and we didn't know it, Texas A&M versus Rice University football game in October of 1992. I was living in Massachusetts, but my dad's work took him to Texas A&M. And Matt, you were a student there at the time.
I was, yeah. So I was in the Corps of Cadets, and so I was one of the uniformed people that you saw running around that day. And if you watched the march in, you may have seen me go by. You didn't realize it, but yeah, that was in 1992, that would have been my sophomore year of, the fall of my sophomore year of college at Texas A&M. So I was absolutely at that football game. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's funny.
So great. And the reason why one reason why I reached out to Matt, at the time you were in a role in fundraising at Texas A&M and you subsequently left. So just tell us where you are now, and then we'll weave in the A&M piece in the questionnaire.
Sure. Yeah. So currently I am a senior director of business development for Children's Miracle Network hospitals. And I've been in that role for right at a year, just a year and a couple of weeks. And so obviously by now I know it all, which by that it means I'm still learning an awful lot, but it's been really, really great. And prior to that, I spent a little over 23 years in fundraising at Texas A&M, between our alumni association, which is the Association of Former Students, and our major gift development operation, which is the Texas A&M Foundation. So between those two, about 23 years. And so it was a long career there, and it's an exciting new chapter with what I'm doing now as well.
That's terrific. I'm excited to hear more. Thank you for giving us that snippet.
Sure.
So Matt, as I always do with these interviews, the very first question I ask each guest, if you could just describe for our audience how you entered the fundraising profession, please.
So it's either an interesting story or one that is pretty common with a lot of people that you meet, in that you get into fundraising oftentimes sort of by accident. I don't know too many people who went through their childhood or even through college and said, what I want to do is I want to be in fundraising. But because there's a lot of mystique that maybe goes, or even stigma that goes along with that,
Yeah.
But I was working, prior to working at A&M, I was working for a computer company that was based out of the Houston area, which is where I'm from originally, the Houston area. And that company eventually moved me to College Station, and I was in HR/recruiting for that company. And so I was moved to College Station from the Houston area, newly married, and that's what put us back into the College Station area. And I was working for that company, and through connections that I had at the A&M Career Center, whenever it was time for me to leave there, and I was looking for other opportunities, my connection with the A&M Career Center had since gone and moved into human resources for the Association of Former Students, which I mentioned a little while ago. And I was thinking there weren't a lot of opportunities in Bryan College Station at the time, unless you were going to work at the university. That was the driver. Yeah. And so I was able to reach out to her and ask her if she had any ideas, if she had any connections, things that were happening in the community. She says, well, by chance, did you see the job opening here for the director of fundraising at the association? I said, I saw it, but according to your job description, I'm neither old enough, I don't have any fundraising experience. I checked none of the boxes.
Yeah.
And she said, well, you should apply for it anyway. And so I said, okay, I will. And I had no expectation that I would get that job. But
Yeah.
Fortunately, I got along really well with everybody through the interview process, and it was just sort of a fake thing. And so I wound up eventually getting that job
Hmm.
and running the annual fund for the association. And that's how I got started into fundraising. So really, it was sort of by accident. It was a little bit by having the right connections, and
Yeah.
like many things for a lot of people, it was just the right thing at the right time, and it turns out it absolutely was.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
And you're back in College Station, so that's great.
Yeah. So once I moved back to College Station, I never left.
Yeah.
I've lived here longer than I did growing up in the Houston
Oh,
area,
wow.
believe it or not. So yeah, this is as much, if not more, so my hometown as where I grew up and went to school and through high school.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah.
And so you've been at the Children's Miracle Network, CMN, for just over a year now.
Yeah.
Um, if you could first describe your core responsibilities in the role you hold
Mhm.
there, and then I would love to know, given the longevity you had at A&M, what were the motivating factors to compel you to think about, this may be the opportunity for my career at this step with CMN?
Yeah. 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 So my job title is Senior Director of Business Development for Children's Miracle Network hospitals. And so, what that means is essentially I'm responsible for going and trying to secure corporate partners, new corporate
Mm.
partners for our organization. And that's the main way that we raise money for our children's hospitals. So
Okay.
we are a network of approximately 170 children's hospitals throughout North America, throughout the United States and Canada.
Wow.
And we act essentially as a source of an annual fund in a way for those hospitals. So the funds that we raise um, throughout the country are dedicated directly to those hospitals, and those are done through our corporate partnerships. So, for example, one of some of the ones that people will recognize the most would be small nations like Walmart and
Oh, yeah.
Sam's Club and Costco, Ace Hard Express. So when folks go into those establishments,
Yeah.
and so for example, later in the spring, early summer, Walmart does its campaign. The fundraising is done at the register by the
Oh,
associates, and they will
yeah.
ask people if they want to make a donation, perhaps buy one of the balloon icons that you may see in some of these places. And the funds that are raised at your local Walmart go directly to the children's hospital in your market.
That's
And
awesome.
that's my job, is to try to get more and more, build our portfolio of corporate partners. And so I'm really a new business.
Yeah.
It's fundraising adjacent, but most of the because the fundraising is actually done at those locations. And so
Yeah.
that's by and large what I'm responsible for doing, is trying to bring on new corporate partners,
Okay.
large and small, so that we can do more and more fundraising for our children's hospitals throughout the country.
Awesome. And given
Yeah.
this hybrid, slash remote environment, are you doing some of that outreach, like today virtually, or are you
Pretty
going
much all of it. Yeah,
all of
yeah,
it?
pretty
Oh,
much all of it.
okay.
Yeah, because we've got corporate headquarters for these companies that are all over the country. So I'm working with people from California to Florida, and from Nebraska to Alaska. So it
Wow.
really, yeah, it's because we've got companies with headquarters all over the place, but they've got footprints, locations, stores, restaurants, whatever, throughout the country.
Yeah.
Most of what I do is in this remote environment, which
Hmm.
um, obviously once COVID hit, we all kind of got a taste of it, but
Yeah,
it works really, really well for what we do. Yeah.
that's terrific. And so the second part of that question,
Yep.
having spent, you know, 20 plus years at Texas A&M, your alma mater, um,
Yeah.
what what made you consider CMN and go for it?
Yeah. So, with a change like that, it's never one reason, right? There's
Yeah.
there's there's always decisions like that are multifaceted, right? They're big sort of life changes, and they impact everybody in your house.
Yeah.
So it was really just a matter of the right time. again, like you said, I had been at A&M for 23 years and had done a lot of different things. I was in a lot of different roles, fortunately, and got to work in different capacities during that time. So I wasn't always
Yeah.
just doing one thing. But mentioning COVID with the ability to work remotely, that also gave a lot of people, myself included, the time to really think about what is it that we want to be able to do with the next stage in our careers. And I was certainly no different in that regard. And so that it gives you time to think about what is it that you want to do, what kinds of things, if I wasn't going to be working at Texas A&M, where I was very comfortable, where I could have easily probably retired from,
Yeah.
what would I want to do, if anything else? And so
Yeah.
it really came down to, okay, I got all this experience and I've done all these different things and have had a variety of successes, wins, losses, taken lumps.
Sure. Yeah.
Have all of this experience. You want to be able to potentially put that to use in another field that could also be meaningful. So the work that's done at Texas A&M and by the A&M Foundation is extraordinarily meaningful.
Yeah.
I always was and always will be grateful for the time that I got to spend there and do the work that I did. My oldest son went to A&M, and
Oh.
in my last role, I worked in fundraising for student affairs in the Corps, and he was in the Corps, and
Oh,
from
wow.
my office to where his dorm room was a couple of 100 yards. And so not many people get to do that. So that was a really cool way to sort of wrap things up.
Yeah.
Um, but what I wanted to also do was, okay, how can I take all of this stuff that I've accumulated over the years and how can I put that to work for another organization and another one that is also very meaningful, that does good work, that makes an impact, that makes a difference.
Yeah.
And I had other organizations that I had been speaking with over a period of a year or two. They
Mhm.
just didn't work out for whatever reason, whether it was location or other factors that you don't take a job or that it doesn't work out for you. But
Yeah.
this one came along and it just really sort of checked a lot of the boxes, right? I mean, the mission is absolutely incredible. The work
Yeah.
that's done by Children's Hospital is absolutely incredible. And so the fact that I could make whatever sort of impact I'm able to eventually make, at least try to make an impact
Yeah.
and be able to do that from a remote environment where it doesn't upset the apple cart with everybody else that's impacted with kids in school and all of that in dual careers.
Yeah.
It just checked an awful lot of boxes, and it's a great organization. I mean, the people are phenomenal, the
Yeah.
cause is phenomenal, and so I'm really really happy to be able to do this now. And it's just it sort of worked out. It was sort of serendipitous in a lot of ways.
Yeah. That's
Yeah,
awesome. It's got to be a good feeling to, to have invested that much time at
yeah,
one place and had successive roles of responsibility, but still be at a point where like you can pivot, you can take on,
yeah,
think about, what I want to do with a next stage. And I agree with you,
yeah,
Matt, that a lot of my guests have talked about the COVID period as a time
yeah,
of like reassessment, reevaluation, and yeah, so you're in good company in that regard. I did the same thing. I was
yeah,
at
yeah.
Intermountain Healthcare at the time and
Hmm.
working with Julia Saxton, who is the
Yeah,
major gift officer for CMN at Intermountain Health.
yeah.
So yeah, lots of people were using that time to reflect and recharge and what's the next stage like. So
Absolutely, absolutely. And even coming out of that, going back to the office for another year or so afterwards, it was good to get back. It was good to be around people, but at the
yeah.
same time, that was always lurking in the back of
Yeah.
the mind. What could I be doing if it's not this? And so
Yeah.
so it really did need to be something special in order to move on, to move away.
Yeah.
So fortunately, I was able to find that.
That's awesome. I'm glad for you.
Thank you, thank you.
Yeah. My next question here is specifically about Texas A&M because
Yeah,
I got a little fixated with A&M when I was in high school. I considered moving out of state for college and happened to be at the A&M campus in College Station. And so just the spirit of the community, and you
yeah.
mentioned you were in the Corps of Cadets.
Hmm.
Um, And I was 16 years old and thought, this is amazing. Like, what a rich college environment
Yeah.
with, untold number of traditions on the university grounds. And so my question here is, it comes from a man who is since retired from A&M, but Carl, I think it was Carl Yadicke, if I'm pronouncing his name right.
It's a hard J, Jadicke, Carl Jadicke.
Jadicke. Okay, so you must have
Yeah,
worked or overlapped with him.
absolutely. Yeah. So
Okay.
whenever I first left the association to go work for the foundation, Carl was my first boss
Oh, wow.
at the foundation. Yeah. So
Wow.
yeah, Carl was an institution unto himself, and it was somebody I learned a tremendous amount from. But yeah, he was my first direct supervisor, my first boss, my first sort of mentor at the foundation whenever I got there. And
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
so I know Carl well. Yeah.
Okay, that's wild. So I talked with him in '06. I was really young in my career, and
Hmm.
again, I was like, well, maybe if I moved out of state, what places kind of speak to me. And so I blindly reached out to Carl and told him why. And it just small world. He's like, well, where are you calling from? I said, I'm calling from Boston, Massachusetts. Well, where do you live? And I said, I live in Waltham, Massachusetts. And Carl said,
Hmm.
I've been to Waltham. I've been to the Friendlies, which is like an Arby's type in the
Yeah.
Northeast. It was just, I mean, such a small
Yeah.
world example. But one thing I remember from my conversation with Carl, which is the question for you, Matt,
Hmm.
is he said the A&M alumni, by and large, were so loyal to the institution that at least in his career experience, he had never gotten a no when he would contact an alum about, can I come talk with you about what we're doing at A&M in terms of uh, development initiatives, love to have you involved. And I thought, man, that is amazing. That is amazing. So writ large, what was your experience like working with alumni in the various roles you held at A&M, please?
Yeah. So Carl's experience and mine were probably a little bit different because when you're when you're a legacy like Carl is,
Oh,
and right, there were folks who I heard that from several times.
oh,
Carl would say stuff like that sometimes, and there was our president at the time. His name was Ed Davis. Ed would say things like, I never hear no. Well, I'm thinking that's because you're Ed, and that's because you're Carl. Um, you need to be down here in the trenches with the rest of us peons because, but I will say, so I did hear no. Yes, I did hear no from time to time.
yeah.
But I will say that if somebody did take your call for after you announced who you were and where you worked and what you were doing, if they still agreed to take your call, the success rate of moving forward with giving conversations and getting involved were pretty high. So we had a
Oh,
pretty high hit rate if you were able to get that first meeting, right?
oh, awesome.
So it really sort of depended on what role and maybe what level of person you were contacting and why.
Yeah.
So Carl, for the most part, was running our engineering development office. So we were a college based. So the foundation was the hub, and we had unit based development officers, and Carl ran our engineering program,
Okay.
fundraising, and he had done that for forever. And
Oh, okay.
so everybody who was anybody within the field knew who he was.
Yeah.
So anyway, so yeah, he had a pretty good hit rate. But so when I started off, I worked in the College of Engineering, and then from there I worked in our national office. We stood up a national office to visit with and try to work with people who lived out of state. So about 80% of Aggies live in Texas. There's plenty of
Oh,
places to work and keep your career going if you're in the state. Between
yeah.
Houston, DFW, Austin, San Antonio, people tend to stay,
Yeah.
but we're also huge. And so 20% of 500, 600, 700,000 as we continue to grow, that's a lot of people.
Yeah.
And so we would go and take Texas A&M to them, and I covered the West Coast.
Oh, okay.
So when I was trying to get meetings from these people, they had been out of touch with A&M. We weren't in the newspaper, we weren't on television, all those things. And when they were in Seattle or in San Francisco or Los Angeles. And so, if people really were interested and loved A&M, they would absolutely take a meeting just with an Aggie because they were coming to their hometown. Others were so removed that maybe they were skeptical about what was really going on, and so you had to do a little bit of selling and trying to get into the door. So it was a mixed bag, if you will, of results. But I will say we probably had more luck than most other schools or most other alumni bases who were getting calls from their development shops to get meetings. I'd say our hit rate was pretty good. But yes, I did hear no.
Oh, okay. Well, thanks for sharing those anecdotes.
Yeah.
My next question, Matt, you have a certificate in nonprofit management. I'm just curious, how has that certificate, the exercise of doing the coursework, how has that enhanced your advancement skill set?
Yeah, so it's been a little while since I've got that that certificate. Yeah, that was 2009 when I got that certificate. So it's been a little while.
Yeah.
So the reasons behind pursuing that were there were several of them. One, I'd say I probably took my undergraduate experience for granted, like a lot of teenagers and kids in their in their early 20s will do. I wanted to prove to myself that I could handle graduate level coursework at a very respectable school. So the Bush School of Government and Public Service is part of Texas A&M, but is a very reputable in what they do in the different fields that they specialize in. So I wanted to prove to myself that I could get a 4.0 and do all that coursework, and so I was able to do that, which was gratifying.
Awesome.
I also wanted to be able to decide, is getting a master's degree something I really want to or need to pursue. This was a foray into that. I ultimately decided not to pursue the full-fledged master's degree, but what I did get from that was a much broader perspective on philanthropy. And all that goes into it, right? So it was only 12 hours. It was 4 courses. You're not going to get a full, MBA type, education out of that. But it did open my eyes to philanthropy on a larger scale. Up to that point, believe it or not, even though I was in fundraising, I never really considered myself to be a fundraiser. I considered myself an Aggie who was doing fundraising on behalf of the school, but there was a good portion of my early career where I thought, I'm doing it now, but I probably would not do this in another life or for another organization or for another school, right? And so it took time, and it's been the evolution of a career to kind of get to the point where, yes, I do identify now as a fundraiser. That's sort of how I tell people what I do now. And that coursework really helped to sort of steer me that direction. But learning the basics of philanthropy more than just the way that we did it at Texas A&M, right? There's a much bigger world out there, even though that was my world for a long, long time. Knowing that there are other things out there and what it is that you can do within that field and make a real difference. That's what that experience really started to open my eyes towards. And has since gotten to me focus on other things now. So it was a real start, but that was quite some time ago. But that was kind of that opening of the eyes, if you will.
That's great. Yeah, thank you. And in my day job, I'm in prospect research and management, and so I didn't do my homework well enough. I didn't know.
That's okay.
I was in 2009, so but thank you for that answer.
No problem. It was also one of those things. It was that program at the time in 2009, distance learning, online learning was still sort of in its infancy. And that school I was maybe in the second or third cohort of people to go through the distance. So even it sounds funny. I was in College Station. The Bush School is at the George Bush Library, which was right down the road from my office. But at that time, I was doing the West Coast travel, and so I was gone a lot. There was no way I could have done it in residence, and so
Oh,
being able to, so being able to do that work and do it in this environment before Zoom ever existed, and get it completed in that way that was another reason why I was able to do it. And I had the time because I was traveling a lot. So I was in airports and hotels and,
oh yeah.
so it's sort of, if there was a time to do it, that was it.
Oh,
So,
nice.
yeah. Yeah.
Excellent. My next question, Matt, is one that I periodically ask guests. I'm just curious, about this particular topic with mentorship and as people are,
Yeah.
as you mentioned at the beginning, like very few people know early on that they want to work in nonprofits. And so it
Right.
often takes someone seeing a talent in people like you to encourage them to think about nonprofit development work.
Yeah.
And so I want to get some of those stories. And so for you and other guests I've asked, who comes to mind in terms of maybe, if not the first, but one of the first professional examples of leadership that was instrumental in your career?
Yeah. So there have been a lot. So
Mhm.
it's really hard. I thought about this, and it's really sort of difficult to pinpoint one person at one point in time, because there are different people who come in and out of your life and at different points of your career who have an influence on you.
Yeah.
And you really try to focus on the positives, but you learn from positive and negative examples of leadership. And
Sure.
how do you apply those? How do you apply the good ones to what you do? And how do you avoid the pitfalls of the ones that you consider to be bad ones? And so
Yeah.
focusing on the good, there were two people early on, and especially in my A&M Foundation career, that I used sort of as a litmus test for how should I best operate,
Oh, okay.
as myself. Because the way that you are successful in fundraising, one of the ways is that you need to be authentic. You need to be yourself. You can emulate others, but you can't copy anybody else, because you have
Right.
to find your own voice and find your own style. And
Mhm.
so there were two people. One was a gentleman named Henry Nemsick. Henry, I'm not sure what he's doing now. He may be retired by now, but he had moved on from A&M after a few years of me working at the foundation. But Henry is the person who literally pulled me from doing what I was doing at the Association of Former Students, and said, "You need to come over to the A&M Foundation.
Mhm.
You need to be doing this work. You're
Yeah.
sort of capped out where you are." And
Mm.
so he at one meeting pulled me over from, it was a joint meeting that we had. It was a conference. At the time it was for the Big 12, whenever
Oh.
A&M was still in the Big 12, and they had a Big
Yeah.
12 development conference, and the A&M Foundation was running it that year.
Mm.
And since I was running the annual fund at the Association of Former Students, I was tasked with sort of running that track of
Mm.
the conference. And so when that was over, Henry pulled me over on the last day. He told me he was going to do it. I didn't believe him, but on the last day of the conference, he pulled me over from one table where I was talking to my colleagues at the association, and pulled me over to another person who I'll mention in a little while, Jim Pelenzar, who had been at the foundation for forever, and said,
Mm.
"Jim, Matt's going to come work for us. We're going to figure it out." And that's sort of how Henry operated, right? He was sort of a bull in the china shop. He went straight for it. And that's how he operated as a development officer too. He was one of these people who would go in on a first meeting and take a proposal. Um, and then you had my first boss, who was Carl at the
Mhm.
foundation. And Carl was, he really wanted to get to know people. If you got to know Carl at all, he didn't subscribe necessarily, strictly to it takes, you need to have 7 unique visits before you deliver a proposal. And that's sort of the
Right.
average. Those may have been the averages, but he was really in the relationship development business.
Mm.
He would never take a proposal on the first visit. That was just not his style. So Carl was the methodical, build that relationship over time. And then Henry was the direct, to the point, let's get this done. And so I found my style to be sort of in the middle.
Oh, interesting.
I always knew that I was there. I was there in front of a person, in front of a prospect, in front of a donor, for a reason.
Yeah.
And they knew I was there for a reason, but I still wanted to get to know them and have that rapport. Um, and if people really valued that rapport building, I would do more of that with them. If other people wanted to get more down to the point and get down to business, I could do that with them. But I found that I wanted to be as efficient as possible, but
Mm.
without being pushy.
Yeah.
So those two were two really good examples of how you can use other people's styles and how they succeed, and how do you
Yeah.
formulate that to develop your own style. And so those were two early examples of people who really kind of shaped how I approached this work anyway. And there were many other
Yeah.
people who have impacted me along the way, but we'd be here way past our allotted time if I were to talk about all of them individually. Yeah.
Yes. Well, I like how you began that, Matt. You prefaced it with, you can't copy someone, but you can emulate some
Right.
of those traits. And you found a way with um, both of those senior leaders early in your career and said, this is
Yeah.
what's going to fit for me. So I really
Hmm.
like that.
Yeah. It's
Um,
important. It's important in this work to find your own style, to find your own rhythm, to know what you're comfortable with and how you do it, and try to apply that as best you can in whatever situation you're in. Stay true to yourself,
yeah.
because that's how you're going to be successful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
My last question, Matt, we have about 5 minutes, and this has
Okay.
been a really fun conversation. So thank you for engaging in this. Um, I often draw some of my questions from noted authors, columnists, and such, because um, it just they put out interesting content that I think can relate to the work we do in nonprofit work. And this question with the quote from Brene Brown, I would love to hear how it resonates with the work you do at CMN, or even just CMN writ large. And so I'll read the quote first from Brene Brown's book, The Gifts of Imperfection. Quote, if we're not practicing gratitude and allowing ourselves to know joy, we are missing out on the two things that will actually sustain us during inevitable hard times. And as I put this question together with the quote from Brene Brown, I thought about, yes, CMN does amazing, meaningful work that impacts children going through significant health challenges in their families. Um, and unfortunately, not every story, has a positive outcome. There are hard
Right.
times.
Yeah.
Um, so how does Brene Brown's viewpoint resonate with you, maybe specifically, or again with CMN's mission, please?
Yeah. So Siemens' mission is to change kids' health and change the future.
Yeah.
That's what we believe that we're doing through the work that we do. Um, you know, that mission really sort of was shown to me. I was fortunate in the time that I was hired, that I was the first big event that CMN hosts every year is an event called Children's Hospitals Week. And
Mm.
it happens in April, so it's coming up here in just a couple of
Oh,
months. And so I had been employed for a few months whenever I went to Orlando last year for Children's Hospitals Week. And this is a meeting where we bring in an awful lot of our corporate partners that I mentioned. We bring in representatives from our partner hospitals are there. Um, the majority of our staff from CMN Hospitals comes in for it. And
mm.
then we also have what we call our champion kids and their families. And
Mm.
so these kids are ambassadors that are selected by each of the hospitals, has their own ambassador. And then there are some who are selected as national ambassadors. And so
Oh,
these kids are able to come and be present at this conference, at this meeting.
mm.
And you get to hear from them directly,
Yeah.
and you hear their stories. And some of them are a little bit older, maybe they're in their early teens, and others are young, maybe they're 6 or 7 years old, and so
Mm.
they don't necessarily have the ability to speak, eloquently about their situations, but their parents do. And then other
Yeah.
kids, if they are a little bit older, some of them are approaching maybe even 18 years old, and so you're able to
Mm.
hear their stories and learn a little bit more about what it is that they have not only gone through in their lives, in their short time on this earth, but
Yeah.
you hear oftentimes about the things that they're dealing with that they're going to deal with for the rest of their lives. Some of these
Yeah.
conditions do not go away,
Mm.
and it's through the care that they receive from these wonderful, wonderful institutions, these hospitals that they are seek treatment at, or they're treated at, that they are able to demonstrate the joy of being there in that moment.
Mm,
And if
yeah.
those kids can go through what they have gone through, and I try to put the stuff that's bothering me up against that,
Yeah.
Shame on me, right? They're
Yeah.
showing joy in the face of just things that you and I just don't have to deal with every
Right.
single day.
Yeah.
A lot of it's painful, a lot of it's time consuming. I mean, the treatments that they have to go through. It's truly inspirational. And so
Yeah.
if you can't find, and they find joy in the little things. And
Yeah.
so that has really been great for me in this past year, to be a part of that, but to also always keep that in mind, keep that at the
Yeah.
forefront of why I do what I do. And when I approach a company, to be able to talk about that specifically, it takes it away from being just another sales arrangement or another
Yes.
business arrangement, to finding other like-minded organizations that really care about making a difference.
Yeah.
And if you can't find joy in that, then I don't know what you can. And so, so those kids, and being able to see and meet them and interact with them and hear from them, and then know that what I'm doing is hopefully going to make an impact, is going to make a difference.
Yeah.
That brings me joy. And
Mm,
so that's why I'm just so happy to be doing what I'm doing now and working for the organization that I work with, and the people that I work with are just awesome. And so,
mm,
yeah, I mean, that's what I take from that. That's what
yeah.
this job means to me, and that's what that quote led me to think about.
Mm. No, those are beautiful sentiments. Thank you, Matt, for sharing those.
Absolutely. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to do so. Yeah.
Yeah. And that is the whole month of April you mentioned, right? This,
No, so it's 1 week in April, that
oh, one
this
week,
Children's
sorry.
Hospitals week. Yeah, so that it happens early, about mid-April,
Oh, okay.
where we do that. And this year it was in Orlando last year, so it was Disney adjacent. This year it's actually on one of the Marriott properties, so at the Dolphin and Swan hotels that are
Oh,
on the
wow.
Disney property is where we'll be this year. So yeah, yeah.
Awesome.
If anybody's a Disney fan, it's a great it's a cool meeting to be at. Yeah, but
Wow.
yeah, you learn a lot. It's a lot of fun. It can be
Mm,
emotional at times, but it's a
sure.
great event. And yeah, so looking forward to going again here in a couple of months.
That's so great. Thank you for sharing that.
Certainly.
Well, Matt, I've really enjoyed our time together in this conversation. Thank you for sharing your experience, sharing what brings you joy in the work you do at CMN specifically, and just for being a great and well-prepared guest. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for that, and thank you for thinking of me. I'm glad to have this opportunity to do this. I enjoy talking about what I do, and I enjoy, if it makes a difference in one person's career, or gives positive thoughts to anybody, then it was time well spent. So I enjoyed the time with you, and thank you for what you do.
My pleasure. Thank you. And for our audience, you will find Matt's conversation on LinkedIn and YouTube, as well as the audio format on Spotify and Podbean. I would love to actually try and air this interview at that week or around that week in April. That'd be really cool.
That would
Um,
be, yeah. So I'm gonna glance over my computer here. Yeah, so it's April 8th through the 11th is when we'll
okay.
is when we'll be in that meeting. And so that would be the target date for you if you wanted to do it during Children's Hospitals Week, the week of April
Yeah.
8th.
So
Yeah.
Monday, April 8th. Let's
Monday,
go.
April 8th is when we kick off. Yeah,
All
that's when we
right.
kick it off.
Well, I'll air your interview that Monday morning as well. That'd be really cool.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you again, Matt, and thanks to our audience for your support of this podcast series. And have a great rest of your week.